Hey there YouTube, welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So, we're back on the Astra, and we're going to finish up fixing the hood. Now, the plan for today is to take and sand this down. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to need some like light body filler or glaze to kind of fill in some of these little dimples that are in the paint. So, from the rust, the wood, how it kind of like bubbled up the metal and stuff, it created high and low spots. So I'm going to see if I can't get this cleaned up a little bit. So I've got this taped off. I sprayed it down pretty good at a local car wash. I used kind of like the cheap setting, so I didn't get the nice like spot free rinse. And then real quick I wiped it down real fast just to make sure I don't have any excess dirt or unexpected grit in here. And basically, from when we did the Plastidip before, I know that I need to sand down and feather out this sharp edge from that clear coat experiment. And then the texture of this, with all the little dimples and stuff and the crevices from the rust, this needs to be cleaned up. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to take this and go over here just lightly to just try and see where all the high spots are. Alright, so I hit that real quick. And I have not wiped the dust off just yet, but I just wanted to kind of show you how distinct you can see some of the high spots. So anywhere where it's white, it's somewhere that got sanded kind of heavy. So in this section here, it's a little bit harder to see all the high spots, but over here you can see that edge is pretty sharp. So that edge caught a little bit. You can see just a little bit of the original paint got scratched there, but even in the original paint you can see the little high spots that are in it. So those little spots are kind of high spots. Same thing with everything that kind of sits out like an island. So these over here would be high spots that are in the paint. And that could be due to how it's sprayed, or it could be, some sort of junk that was in it when I sprayed it down. More than likely, it's some sort of junk or dust that's in it. And then I use the tape here right along the line again, because this is going to be the line that I use to kind of cut off with the Plastidip later to add a stripe. And by taping this off, it helps limit the space that I have to do. And also, if I do kind of, sharpen this a little bit, it's right across that body line, so it'll be a little bit more hidden than this area here where it's in a nice flat area. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this with a little bit of a heavier grit, just so that I can try and come through with some primer and see where it stands. The heavier grit will give it a little bit better tooth and help it to stick. As you can see, I've been hitting this with a little bit more aggressive sandpaper. So this is a 400 grit, and I've worked a good bit on especially this bottom corner here. So you can see that it's almost level, so there's no real line there, and the line reappears as you go back up. So how far that really needs to be taken off is kind of a matter of debate and how far you want to take it. But as with any paint job, your prep is what determines the outcome. So I'm going to continue to work on it until it's pretty much all nice and even and I can't see anything. This area here though, you can see the scratched up outer high points and then the lower divots. Next up is the Rustoleum, and this is 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. So with automotive primers, they're kind of cool because some of them are just a primer. Some of them are meant to be like a spray filler, so it puts a very fine amount of build onto it. So more than a standard primer would. So it's a little bit thicker and can help fill in like little imperfections. These little divots might be filled with a couple coats of this. But the goal is to put down about 2 or 3 coats on here, and then we'll sand it again just to see how smooth it is. And if you're thinking it's kind of weird that I'm doing this outside, it's because it is a little chilly. So today it's only about 57 degrees as a high. So I'm trying to build as much heat out here as I can, both by having the cans outside, doing the job outside, and letting everything be in the sun. This may not be the greatest idea, but it may help the dry time just a little bit more. Okay. And then real quick, we'll check the spray pattern. Alright, so kind of a small, tight little circle. So at 70 degrees with 50% relative humidity, this dries the touch in 10 minutes. It says to allow more time in cooler temperatures. And when dry, surface can be immediately recoated, top coated, or wet sanded. So we got about probably, I would say, 15 minutes just to be safe. Sit and wait for this to dry up. And what I really need to do is kind of focus on this area here to try and fill in those little gaps. Whoop. I might have focused a little bit too much. Well, I'm waiting on that to finish flashing. Let's talk about this. So besides using True-On body filler, there's what they call glazing and spot putty. This is a much finer, much thinner putty. And it's one of those things where essentially you put it on and it's for just little teeny tiny ones. So this probably would have been great to put on that and then sand smooth. And then I would only have to do maybe 1 or 2 quick shots of the primer. And then probably go right over that with the Plastidip. But I'm kind of seeing if I can skip doing this. You can still kind of see all the divots. So it's very possible I may still want to use that glaze. I can try and build up a few more layers of the paint and primer and see if it fills it. And that's why you don't want to get a little overzealous and just stick your finger in it and just see how it's going. Thus far, we've done about 5 coats. Focusing primarily over that rusty textured spot. You can see it's still a little bumpy, and hopefully that's just building up on that. But like that spot right there, looks like that might need a little bit extra. So I'll do one more additional coat, spray that a little bit heavy, and then I'll wet sand it down with about 1000 grit, and we'll see where we're at. And then for this primer, you can wet sand it, you just can't dry sand it until after about like 2 to 4 hours, but you can wet sand it right away. So real quick, we'll throw some water down. Make sure the sandpaper is good and wet, and we'll just real gently start to work it. Alright, so I've been sanding this with a little bit of 500 grit, and as you can see, it's looking pretty smoothish. So what you're looking for is anything that kind of stands out. So that right there is a little teeny tiny imperfection. So that's a divot. That right there is kind of a divot. There's a couple other ones. So they're all very teeny tiny and small. So the weird thing is they're probably similar in size to these rock chips and similar in depth. So at this point, this is probably good enough to let it go. Otherwise, you may have one really perfect section that the rest of the car doesn't stand up to. And then, if you remember, I had built up quite the paint edge. And you'll do the same thing with the primer, especially having it taped off. There's some tricks you can do to help fight it, but what I'll need to do now is soften these edges and do a little bit of stuff over here, because it looks like the tape wasn't sitting quite all the way down. To help soften this in like a non-linear fashion, I've got a little bit of brake clean on a rag. All I'm gonna do is sadly drag it across the corner. And all I'm really looking for is to disturb the edge enough that it doesn't look like a line to the human eye. Because you're going to spot a line pretty easily. And then just take the clean end and lightly buff the remainder off. And what that'll give you is a relatively smooth transition. That's hopefully fairly naked to the human eye. And then you want to go along it real quick just to see if you've got any kind of big buildups or any large like stuff. So like right here, this feels just a little rough. So I'll probably wipe this area down real quick just to clean that up just a touch. But otherwise, this looks much smoother than it did before. Now we need to try and figure out what we're doing as far as taping. So what I'm thinking is I kind of want to do a stripe. I'm debating doing a negative space. So essentially one main thick stripe, a little bit of an open area, and then another kind of semi-thinner stripe. So I was thinking maybe 4 to 6 inch stripe, like a 1/2 inch break, and either a 1 inch stripe or like a 1/2 inch stripe, almost like you just move that 1/2 inch section over. But you can see the way I have this kind of set up, I've got the 2 pieces of tape there. So this tape here is the main ending point. These 2, we're spacing this out far enough that I think that would fully cover the repair here. Then it comes down to, I kind of wanted it a little bit wider than just those 2 blue pieces. But as soon as I go a little bit wider, that opens up these to being out in the open. And there's quite a few little nicks as you go up, including here and a couple underneath here. So if I go 3 tape widths wide, that'll cover those up. We've got this green tape being our negative space line. So that'll be the outside of the stripe. This will be the end point of the stripe, and then the start of the next stripe. Then I wanted the stripe to be roughly about 1 inch. So I've got it running just a little bit next to that piece of tape there. Now this can be very tricky, because especially right here, you can see that slight increase in size of the gap, and that could stand out very definitely. What I'm going to try and do is close that down just a little bit. That way it's all the way maintained. Because it's amazing how easy your eye can pick up those little differences in the gaps. And then this line out here, this will be the end line. So this blue piece will get pulled once I fix the green stripe right there in the center. Because I think I was trying to recreate the curve that kind of happens right there, and I made it a little wonky. So, but these 2 were easy to lay down and seem to move fairly simply. So I'm hoping once I do that, it'll be harder to tell the difference in the width of this one, but it'll be much easier to tell the difference in the width on that one. This is all taped off, masked off. Should be about ready to go. I've got the cans chilling in hot water, trying to warm them up. And then we'll be ready to hit this with some paint. Well, Plastidip. Just do one quick final check just to make sure the tape is down. You don't want to touch the surface itself, because then you got to clean it again. So we've already wiped it down with a quick can of Putty. Looks like the tape's all pretty much good to go. And then the first coat is just a light kind of tack coat. So starting up here, I'll hit it real quick just to kind of get the little bit on the back edge of the hood. So quick test spray. Then so as you can see, it just has a little bit that looks dirty. Once this dries, we can go ahead and hit it with the next coat. And I'm definitely putting the cans back in the water to keep them nice and warm. Now, with the last time when we did the whole hood, one of the major problems that I had was that I kept trying to push everything out of the can that I could. But really, as soon as you get your first little kind of sputter with the paint, you need to stop if you're doing it from a can. So, because what's going to happen then is you're going to start getting inconsistent sprays, and you may want to spray in a little bit too heavy because you paused a little bit, or as it's sucking the last little bit out of the can, it may wind up starting to form like weird little droplets and goblets that'll hit and kind of screw up your paint job as you're going. So as soon as you start getting a little bit of a sputter out of a spray can, stop using that can, move to a different one. Time for coat number 2. And then with coat number 2, I'm going to go a little bit heavier, but I'm still not going to go super heavy and super wet. So it'll be a little bit better coverage, give you a little bit better idea what it'll wind up looking like in the end, but it still won't be real super great looking. We'll do the same thing we did before. We'll start at the back. That way it kind of gets a little bit of a buildup on the back side, on the back part of the hood. So quick test spray. All right, now putting this one down a little bit too far away, so you can see kind of a little bit of a heavier texture. So when I go to do this later, I need to come in just a little bit tighter to this front section. The weird part is I have this cardboard box here, so I'll need to remember to spray like this in order to help clean this up. Coat number 3. This one's where it's going to start to get a little heavy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a heavy shot back here and kind of a heavy shot up here, and then I'll probably just work my way up the hood. Here's that coat now that it started to dry a little bit. So it's not fully dried yet. You can definitely see like the rock chips that were there. You can still kind of make out where the repair was, but that's also starting to fade. So it's turning out relatively well. The thing is that I need to start shaking that second can, because this is starting to get a little bit light, and I don't know when this is going to start to fail. But if I'm in the middle of a coat, I want to transition fairly quickly over to a different can, just to make sure that I get a more consistent spray out of it. And you can kind of see, especially up here, it kind of felt like it was starting to spray a little bit light, so it's got a touch more texture. But that can also be what I was doing with my hands and my technique. So that's the hard part about doing Plastidip in a can, is that you're held to how this little spray nozzle works. Whereas if you use an actual spray gun, a spray gun has a much more distinct, much more predictable pattern. This, very unpredictable. Especially as the can starts to get empty of both propellant and paint. But it's definitely interesting to look at. And this is only about 3 minutes in, so I probably still have about another good 7 minutes to do 10 minutes in between the wet coats. And what I'm going to do with the last and final coat is I'll make sure that it's nice and heavy and wet, and then I'll pull the tape. Alright, so this coat here is done. And this one I kind of messed up. I went a little bit too close to the panel doing. Still doesn't look that bad. It does have some striping, which I'll try and fix with this next shot. The thing I won't be able to fix is this right here. So that's a little bit of like a globbing problem. So that'll be kind of interesting to see how it turns out. Plus, you can still kind of see a little bit of like the primed area, but a lot of that's mostly gone now. What's more evident are the rock chips. So swapped to the other can, brought the nozzle over. Can's still good and warm, and then I'm going to spray this one off camera just so I can really concentrate on it. And what I'll need to do is spray it real fast and then quickly yank off the tape and the masking. That way it's able to get a nice clean break on the tape lines. Hopefully without accidentally dragging anything into it. Kind of like before. Every car's got a good distance. This looks pretty good from about this far away, which I would say is about 7 feet. Once you start to get closer, especially if you're looking really, really hard at it, you can kind of see where I kind of messed up a little bit. So this dried a little bit too much, so you can kind of see those little ridges, and those little ridges are from me pulling the tape, and it was just a little bit too set up, so it was a little bit too dry to have tried to pull it then. So in hindsight, I kind of wish I would have done something where I would have had like the first hood that I did, where I had multiple paint tapes to pull off real quick. That way you know that you've got just a little teeny bit holding onto it, not a, you know, kind of a thick strip with a good amount of strength. So, but all in all, came out pretty good. You can still kind of make out where the repair was, but any of the rock chips are much more visible, including the one up here, some over here. So if it wasn't for the tape jittering, this would have came out pretty much as I would have expected it to. And for the most part, unless you're looking exactly right where you need to be looking, right now you can't really tell that that was repaired. So I'm gonna let it sit, leave her be, let it set up for a bit, see how it turns out, give the car a good car wash, and hopefully it won't peel that off, I'm pretty sure I gotta wait at least a week before I can wash it. So that way it's got plenty of time to get set up. So I used one whole, well, I used up a bunch of one can, and I did one coat out of another can. The handy thing is, that'll leave me plenty to try and do with the next project, which is this right here. Oh, it looks horrible. But I'd definitely say this stripe turned out way better than the hood did. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll check you next time.